Hi everyone, Joseline Nicholas here. I'm making a recording of our previous webinar just because we had some technical issues and we couldn't get through the full presentation when we had the webinar. So here's a presentation as I had promised. And if you have any questions, please let us know. We're always happy to connect, look at your specific situation and add value where we can. So once again, as I said, my name is Joseline Nicholas. And I am a realtor and a full-time real estate investor here in Southern Ontario. I've been a realtor for about 4 years now, and I been a full-time investor for the last, I'm gonna say 8 years, 7 to 8 years. And we own properties in Hamilton, Guelph, and Kitchener-Waterloo. And I started my journey as an economist. Actually, I used to work for the Ontario government, but while I was working my full-time job, my husband and I were buying properties on the side. So that's basically how we got into real estate. And we've had a ton of experience selling and buying tenanted properties, both as an investor myself and as a realtor helping my clients buy and sell tenanted properties. So if I had to pick a superpower, it'd have to be building wealth through real estate because I've helped my friends do it. I've seen what it's done for my family. I've helped my clients do it as well. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I would like to see a lot more families invest in real estate because this is one of the ways to save for your retirement, save for your kids' tuition, things like that. So this is something that I'm very passionate about and I'm always happy to talk about. So today we're going to be looking at a quick market update. We'll look at some tenant rights and landlord rights as it relates to selling a property in Ontario. We'll also look at some practical advice and examples and a checklist for selling tenanted properties. If you're here and you have a tenanted property that you'd like to sell, this is something that we're going to walk through and see what you can do to get that going. Now, I must say that I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a paralegal either. I'm a realtor and I'm giving advice from a real estate perspective. If you have a situation that you need me to look into, maybe something specific, I'm happy to look at that. But also if you need to connect with a legal professional, please do not hesitate. Contact a lawyer or a paralegal. And if you don't have those connections, let us know because we have lawyers and paralegals that we work with on a regular basis. Okay. So as a quick market update, many of you know that the overnight rate has been going up for the Bank of Canada from 0.25% to now 5%. So that's where we are right now. And the increase in rates has been causing a lot of uncertainty in the market. So we're seeing fewer buyers as compared to a year ago or even 2 years ago. And most of the buyers in the market are also like their budget has gone down. So what they could have afforded 2 years ago or a year ago is much different from what they're being pre-qualified for today. One of the reasons why that is because back then the qualifying rate, which was the stress test, was much lower. I think it was about 4.25%. And now it is much higher. I think it's somewhere around 8%. And because of that, a lot more people aren't qualifying for mortgages. And those who are qualifying for a lower amount than they would have qualified for 2 years ago. So that is causing a lot of uncertainty. Also, the monthly payments has gone up like crazy. I know that you probably know because you own a property, especially if you're on a variable rate mortgages. More people have gone from like $2,000 monthly payment to now like $4,000 or $5,000. So lots has changed, and the impact on the market itself fluctuates. Like I know a couple months ago, prices were picking up again. Properties were selling quickly. We were starting to see multiple offers again. But as I'm speaking today, this week and last week and the last few weeks, we've seen the market quite up. I would say maybe from August. Usually September is supposed to be a very active month where people are buying and selling. Same with October, but we're not seeing that same level of activity as we've seen in the previous years. And part of it could be that the consumer doesn't have confidence in what's happening right now. People don't know where our economy is heading. There's a lot of talks about a recession, and I think we might already be in one, but the data hasn't come out yet to support that, but there's a lot of uncertainty where even prices, we're feeling it on the real estate side of things. This is a good time though for those who are looking to buy. But for selling, definitely we have to be more creative to sell the property. Gone are the days of just putting a sign on the lawn and hoping that it sells, even though I never did that myself. But we have to make sure that the property shows really well. We have to make sure that the property is accessible, which is why you're here. One of the challenges that we face when selling a tenanted property is some tenants might say, you know, they don't want to be bothered at certain times, or like there's restrictions to showings. That will cause a problem because you need to have your property accessible. People have to be able to go through. Legally, a tenant cannot refuse showings. However, we've seen situations where the tenant isn't cooperating at all. So part of this webinar, we're going to get into those situations and talk about how our clients have overcome it in the past. So one thing that you should keep in mind when you're selling a tenanted property is the timing of it. You have to be thinking about, for example, if you own a student rental, you have to be thinking about when students are coming in and when they're leaving, when the new leases are starting and when they end. In this area of Kitchener-Waterloo, Hamilton, we're looking at a May 1st or September 1st move-in date. So most leases will be starting on May 1st. This is advantageous to you because you also have to look, if you have a lease, the students have a lease, you have to be looking at when their lease expires. And that would give you an advantage because if the lease has expired and the student is on a month-to-month basis, now you open up a larger buyer pool to parents whose children want to move into the property. However, if you're on a lease, then you can only sell to investors who will keep the students there and wait until the lease is up or until the student moves out. You also have to keep in mind for student rentals again is that, you know, mid-March to April is not an ideal time to sell a student rental because the students are busy and they have exams. We've seen a lot of them actually studying from home, writing exams from home, like doing everything online. So with that, the students might restrict access to their rooms. I've seen situations where say, okay, you can't see this room, you can't see that room. And if it's a 3-bedroom house, you can't see 2 of the 3 rooms, that is a lot. So we're finding buyers having to go with other properties simply because they didn't get to see the property that they actually wanted to see. So because of that, I would say as an investor, watch out for those timelines and make sure that when you're selling, the property is actually accessible. Another thing to keep in mind is if you are selling a property, you have to follow the LTV regulations. You have to make sure that, you know, coming back to timing, that you can close at a time that allows for proper notice to be issued to the tenant. What I'm trying to say is if you have a tenant that's on a month-to-month and you want to sell it, make sure that you're structuring the sale such that you can still give them 60 days notice if the buyer or buyer's family wants to move in. Okay. So with the tenant rights, the tenant has the right to occupy the rental property within a fixed term lease as well as month-to-month lease. On this point, I just want to elaborate and say the fact that your tenant doesn't have a lease in place does not mean that you can kick them out to sell the property. You can't kick tenants out to sell a property. So they have the right to occupy the rental unit with a lease or without a lease. In this case, when the tenant is not on a lease, you have a month-to-month agreement going. However, you cannot kick people out just to sell the property. If you own a property, I'm pretty sure you might already know this, but I've had questions come at me, you know, people asking if they can, we want to sell our property, can we kick our tenant out? No, you can't. There are ways around it, but these are legal ways. Do not take shortcuts or try to do something that's not acceptable because you'll be fined for it. You also have to keep in mind that we have to give 24-hour notice for accessing the property. And this includes for photography, staging, or even showings. So when we have showings, we have to always make sure that we're giving the tenant 24 hours before anybody comes to the property. As I said earlier, you also have to keep in mind that if the buyer or the buyer's family is moving into the property, you have to give at least 60 days notice. And this is something actually that's interesting. When we talk about 60 days notice, we're talking about 2 full months, not just 60 days. So for example, right now we're in October. Today is October 23rd. If we are giving 60 days notice, it has to be the whole month of November and the whole month of December. So in this case, if a tenant was to buy a property today that's tenanted, to give proper notice, the person has to move in as of January 1st. The reason I'm going into details about this is because I've seen a lot of mistakes. I've seen mistakes where, like, if I'm on the buy side, you know, I'm buying a tenanted property. It's not really my job as a realtor to make sure that the seller's realtor is doing a good job. It's the seller's agent who's supposed to know these things and make sure that they agree to terms that can actually be achieved. We've seen situations where the listing agent signs this, they get this agreement signed, saying, yes, we can, you know, we can close. Let's say, for example, we give them a closing of, you know, December 15, and they agree to give vacant possession as of December 15. You can't do that. I know that as a buyer's agent, but it's not my job to correct him. You know, if this is a date that works for my client, I will put it in there. I will prepare an agreement of purchase and sale, give it to the listing agent who's representing the seller. It is his job to come back and say, look, the property is tenanted, we cannot meet these deadlines, or we cannot provide vacant possession. But I'm telling you, there's many agents out there that don't know this information. And one of the reasons they don't know is because maybe they don't own properties themselves. So they don't even know some of these rules and regulations. So I will give you an example. A few years ago, a client of mine bought a property, and in the agreement of purchase and sale, if you do not specify anything in Schedule A about a property being tenanted and the arrangement around the tenants, if you do not specify that, automatically the agreement says you will issue vacant possession upon closing. And this is true for residential properties. So anything below 4 units and below. So my client bought this property. We did not address the tenant situation in the Schedule A. And the reason for that is because it's not my job to bring it up. I'm representing the buyer. So I am writing an agreement with the buyer's interest in mind. The listing agent, however, it is his job to be able to catch these things, to say, look, you guys did not say anything about the tenants. We need you to specify that, you know, we need you to say, you know, we can't give you vacant possession, or we need to be able to get into details and find out this situation. Otherwise, if this topic is not addressed between the two parties at the time when the agreement is being signed, automatically the seller must provide vacant possession to the buyer. So this happened. And then maybe a few weeks before closing, the listing agent called me and said, hey, the property is tenanted and we can't give vacant possession. And I was like, why is that? And why did you guys bring it up when we were doing the agreement of purchase and sale, right? Now the paperwork is with the lawyers. At that point, it's too late to change anything, right? So what they had to do is they had to pay the tenant to move out. I think they paid like anywhere from 15 to 20,000. They had to pay the tenant 20,000 to move out so that they can provide vacant possession. The seller just lost 20,000 of their money simply because the realtor, or even both their team did not figure out that they couldn't give vacant possession on time. For my client, everything worked out well. You know, he wanted a property, he loved it, he wanted vacant possession. He was able to get the property with vacant possession. So if you are working with realtors, make sure that they understand these things and make sure that they're working in your best interest. And I'm also doing this webinar to educate you such that when you're going through this process, these are questions you can ask. These are questions you can always remind your realtor. If you're writing an agreement of purchase and sale on the day of, you can't correct it after, unless you're giving something of value to the buyer, you know, like give and take type of situation. And you have to remember also as a landlord that you cannot interfere with the tenant's reasonable enjoyment of the rental unit. What I mean by this is there's a timeline as to when showings are allowed. You cannot go there at 9 p.m. Let's say, you know, some of them go to bed early or they have young kids. you can only show properties between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. In some cases, actually, now that I'm on this topic about rights and responsibilities, you have to negotiate with the tenant. I've seen situations where, the landlord say, oh, the real estate, blah, 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 the rights are, I have the right to access this property, I have the right to do this. The truth is, it works better if you negotiate with them and find a win-win situation. I'm not saying, because I've seen some negotiations that go wrong where the tenant doesn't want and they have the upper hand. That's not the kind of negotiation that I'm talking about. But it's more like working with their schedule to see what works. I'll give you an example. Most of the time when I list properties, I do not allow showings after 6 o'clock. Even though I know that it's my right to show, we can allow showings all the way up to 8 p.m. But I know if this was my own home, by 8 p.m., if you have young kids, they're already sleeping, you have a bedtime routine going. So even if I was selling my own property, I wouldn't want people to be in my home that late. So because I want to, have a good working relationship with the tenants, I will literally say no showings after 6 o'clock. Anybody who wants to see the property after 6, they can maybe come another day, book for a weekend or something if you're working. But you basically give the tenant something, and in return, they give you something as well. In this case, with the corporation and making sure the property is clean and making sure that they don't say negative things to the buyers who are walking through the property, because that also happens. When it comes to the landlord, it is your right to sell your property whenever you want. It is your right to make repairs, and it is your right to enter the property with proper notice. There are more rights to the landlord's rights, but however, when it comes to selling a property, these are the ones that are, the ones that make the biggest difference. I want you to know that you can sell. The fact that it's tenanted doesn't mean you have to hold on to it, because I know there are people right now who are having a hard time, and maybe they're not in a position to maintain the property that they have, and I'm talking about this because we've seen a lot of cases lately where the payments are so high and the property is not cash flowing, and it's just so hard, financially. So people who are in those positions, you can sell your property for sure, right? However, it might not be the best case scenario. However, I want you to know that you have that right. You can sell that property. You also have the right to make repairs, and actually it's also in the tenant's best interest that you make these repairs. And I've seen people who just let their properties, like they know that there's a leak or they just let it sit. That is a mistake, because you're taking money out of your own pocket. This will end up causing bigger problems, and it will cost you more down the road. So if you want to make repairs, if you want to get started to get the property market ready, let me know. I actually have a list of repairs that add the most amount of value, or that bring the highest return when you do the renovation. So let us know if you're thinking about doing some repairs to prepare for when you're ready to go to market. That is something that we're always happy to discuss as well. You also have the right to enter the property with proper notice. And as I said, the tenant cannot restrict you from going into the property. If you give proper notice and you're within the accepted time limit, which is 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. However, I've seen situations where the tenant says, no way, nobody's coming in. In that case, like they think there's things you can do, because they can't do that. But I find always one of the ways is definitely to negotiate with them, right? And I've had to work with paralegals in this situation. If you have a problem with a tenant, you can also work with your paralegal to make sure that the tenant understands that it is your right to have people come through. They cannot restrict showings. In fact, that could be cause for eviction if they're restricting that. However, I would say before you start being strong on the language with them, I'd say try to negotiate, have a win-win. If they're reasonable people, you'll come to a solution. However, if they're being unreasonable, then that is when you have to bring in a paralegal and see what can be done. Okay, so when you're selling a tenanted property, there are multiple ways that you can give multiple ways to close the property. You can either close it as, asking the buyer to assume the tenant. In this case, you're not providing vacant possession, and the agreement of purchase and sale has to say that vacant possession will not be provided. Because if you don't say that, as I said, automatically, you're saying we can give vacant possession. The problem with this strategy is that it reduces the pool of buyers to investors only, because who else is looking to buy a property that's already tenanted, right? And also it may reduce the price, the sale price, because first of all, the pool of buyers is only limited to investors, and a lot of investors aren't buying right now. And the reason a lot of investors are not buying is because rates are so high. In most cases, what the tenant is paying cannot cover the monthly payment, the mortgage payment, and all other expenses. So there's like a negative cash flow. So we're seeing that when you're seeing a property that already has a tenant, we have to be creative, and we have to see, especially if they're on a lease. If they're on a lease, then you can't break that lease, you know? So we have to get more creative and see how else to promote the property such that it makes sense to the potential buyers. Another strategy that I've seen, some buyers will buy the property and assume the tenant and wait for the lease to be up, and then they can move in. But that is also a conversation you have to have. And for a buyer to go through that, it must be a good deal for them. Like that's what it comes back to point number 2, where the price has to be adjusted to account for those issues. Another option is where you're providing vacant possession to the buyer as a seller. And there's 2 ways to do this. You can either do it through a mutual agreement to end the tenancy, which is an N11, or you can do it via N12, where you serve notice to the tenant. However, you have to keep in mind that with N12 to work, the buyer has to express interest in writing that they will move in, or their immediate family member will move in. When it comes to this point, the N12 point, I like to pause and say, you have to be careful. Because some buyers will say, you know, I want to move in. They'll just say, you know, like, well, maybe they could even like tell their realtor that they will move in. But the truth is, they might not, and they could choose not to move in. In this case, you as a landlord, you're still on the hook. The tenant can still sue you later. So what I've seen in this case, what I recommend my clients do is, if the buyer wants to move in or their immediate family member wants to move in, I get them to sign an affidavit that says, I, so, you know, Mr. Buyer, I am, you know, I'm moving into this property, or my immediate family member is moving in, and I am liable for anything. Like, if basically I am removing liability from the seller. If this doesn't happen, I take full responsibility of what could happen after. And what this does is, if they end up not moving in, you have this agreement that says the buyer has it in writing that they will move in, and they asked me to issue notice, but I was only acting on their behalf. That reduces your liability. And if indeed a tenant sues you and you find that you acted in bad faith, you can be fined up to $50,000. That's a lot of money to start with. And also that's a lot of, because you also have to pay your legal fees and all that. Like, it's a lot to go through. I wouldn't recommend that you do anything in bad faith. I would say just make sure that you're doing things right, follow the rules, and you succeed as an investor. You have better luck when you play by the rules. With an N11, this is, some people call it a cash for keys. In this case, you cooperate with the tenants. On this point, the number 1 thing that I'll say is, make sure that you don't pay the tenants before they move out. I've seen situations where people negotiate cash for keys and they have an agreement in place, and then they pay the tenant before they move out. What if they don't move out? What do you do then? Because now you have to go through, yes, you have an N11 signed, they have to move out, but you have to apply to the LTB, and that might take 2 to 3 months. So to make sure that, you know, things work better. And also, I, as an investor, there are things I would not do myself. If I'm sensing that the situation is getting complicated, I would involve a paralegal and have them do it on my behalf. Because when they do it, they will do it right. And I've seen with the LTB that even small mistakes can delay the process a few months. And that is a few months that you're going with, a problem situation, right? In some cases, the tenants aren't paying rent. So you can go a few months where the tenant's not paying rent and it's vacant simply because you made some mistakes. I find that it's cheaper to always work with professionals, because if they know what they're doing, that's another thing too. I've worked with paralegals who have no clue what they're doing. I don't know why, but with any industry, there are people who are, top of the line, and then there are people who are just trying to make it. So when you're working with professionals, always make sure that you're working with people who know what they're doing. But I find that the right paralegal will save you money, it will save you time, it will save you headache and future lawsuits. So always make sure when I'm negotiating this contract, anything that feels complicated or anything that feels, not so straightforward, I just involve a paralegal and have them do it for me. Okay. So if you are thinking about selling a tenanted property right now, the things that you should be thinking about are, to start, you have to be thinking about the timelines, like I said, based on your circumstances. You have to be looking at the property and saying, when would I like to sell? And are the tenants on a lease? Are they not on a lease? If they're on a lease, when does the lease expire? I've seen tenants who have 2-year leases. Like, you have to know that. And if you don't want to wait until the lease is up, you can still sell. However, you have to know that you will only be selling to a pool of investors. There's nothing wrong with that, but I want you to be aware that that will be likely the situation. You also have to be thinking about, if I'm thinking about selling and this is my timeline, what should I be doing to the property to, maintain basically maintenance and fix some minor repairs that need to be done. You can still do repairs while the tenant is there. One of the top things I should definitely fix is any evidence of water. If there's leaks or there's water damage or where water is coming in, anything water related, you have to fix right away. Like, you have to fix it yesterday almost, for 2 reasons. One, water is really dangerous because it can damage, like if there's like foundation issues where water is coming in and there's mold, that could, first of all, damaging your property. And second of all, most buyers will shy away from that. In a market like we are in right now, where buyers have options, very few people will buy a property that has water problems. And the problem is with water, even if there's a little bit of it, people always assume that the problem is bigger than they can see. Because in most cases, pipes are hidden, or if there's a crack in the foundation, those things are not things that you can easily see. So every time there's any evidence of water, it's a problem. So when I'm talking to my clients, I tell them, before you sell your property, go and do an inspection. Inspect the condition of the property. Okay, see what's going on in there. If there's any sign of any water, for sure, mold, anything related to that, fix it. It's much cheaper for you to fix it than to sell the property and expect the buyer to fix it. While I'm on that point, you can also choose to do some minor things like painting or just outdoor, like you could basically upgrade the curb appeal of the property. Those are all things that you can do while the tenant is there. And also, if you have a good tenant, you've had a good relationship with them, you can negotiate to see how much more you can do while they're in there, right? You could change some of the fixtures, the toilet fixtures. Like, there are things you can definitely do that will bring a higher return on your investment. As I said again, I do have a list of repairs that yield the highest return on your investment. So if you are thinking about doing any renovations to a property, let me know and I'll provide that to you. Another point is, do not sign any new leases. If you're thinking about selling, do not sign any new leases. If you end up signing a lease, make it month to month. If you have a vacant unit, depending on when you want to sell, you're probably better off leaving that unit vacant. And I know that it's probably money out of your pocket, but I would assume that if you're thinking about selling and you have a vacant unit, you would do it sooner than later. However, most buyers want to buy a property that's vacant. And a vacant property comes with a lot of advantages. There's no complications with tenants. There's nowhere to, you don't have to worry about, lower than market rents. So if you have a unit right now that is vacant and you're thinking about selling, I would say maybe sell sooner and don't sign any new leases. And if you end up signing any new leases just because your timeline doesn't allow to keep it vacant, I would say make it month to month. Because if it's month to month, then you can still sell to those buyers who want to move in. Okay, once you've done these three, then you have to inform the tenants about your plans to sell. I've seen landlords who say, oh, I don't want to let my tenants know that I'm selling. Honestly, I don't know if that is a smart way, because once they find out from another source, then you have a problem, right? They'll be upset at you. They'll try to do things to sabotage your selling plans. I've seen a situation where, I go in a property with my buyers, and the tenant is there, and they'll start telling us all kinds of things about the property. All of it negative, and also maybe exaggerated, sometimes even like lying. Why? They feel betrayed by the tenant. They don't have a good, they feel betrayed by the landlord. They don't have a good relation with them. They didn't know the property was going to be sold until like last minute. And it doesn't work out for anybody. I feel like it's much better if you're an upfront person, you're honest, you tell them the truth, you're planning to sell. In fact, on my own properties, if I'm planning to sell, I will even tell the tenants ahead of time, like maybe a month or two ahead of time. I say, look, I'm going to sell my property. I don't know who's going to buy it. A buyer who wants to move in might buy it, which means you have to move out. Can you start looking at your options? And I've had some tenants who come back and say, hey, we want to try and see if we can buy it. In that case, I'll work with them. I'll introduce them to my mortgage broker. They will get qualified, look at their numbers. If indeed they can buy it, then we talk price. But if they can't buy it, then I sell it. But they know that I give them that option. I give them the option for them to even purchase it if they wanted to, right? However, I would say also, before you go into that option, connect with a realtor before you start negotiating price on your property. Because a lot of buyers, a lot of landlords, it's hard to know or to keep a tab on property valuations, especially if you don't work in this industry on a regular basis. I would say, before you do this, make sure that you have at least a market analysis that says this is what my property is worth. Because I've seen situations too where you negotiate with your tenant and you end up selling the property to your tenant for much less than what it's worth. I wouldn't want you to be in that position. So I'd say make sure that in these steps, in fact, if I was a landlord right now, I would just connect with a realtor and have them, especially a good one. Like if you're in this area, our team is happy to help. We can guide you through the whole process. The reason I'm able to do it myself is because I'm in the market every day. I know what my property is worth. If I can get 800 on the market, might as well get 800 for my tenant, right? It's much easier. I'm not losing anything in terms of underselling my property. But at the same time, a lot of our tenants are a lot of people are good people. I'm giving them an opportunity to own a home. Sometimes it takes longer. We have to work with them, blah, blah, blah. But I'm happy if their family gets a home and I also get my price, which is what I wanted. Win-win situation. My approach to business is always win-win. I'm never, ever looking to win while somebody else loses. Of course, in business, sometimes that will happen, but it's never my intention. So the same applies to tenants. If you're the kind of landlord who wants to win while everybody else loses, you will not be able to succeed in this industry. I find, especially when it comes to selling a tenanted property, you have to be able to listen to people, respect them, treat them well, negotiate, and you'll get away with so much. Like in some cases, my tenants, there's a group of tenants that I've had in the past where they would even allow me to show properties without the 24-hour notice. Why? We have such a strong relationship and they know I respect them. And they know that, no matter what's going on, it's just that I have to sell my property. It's nothing against them, right? Some of my clients in the past have negotiated interesting situations with their tenants where the tenant allows them to basically just show for 1 week. The tenant will go away on vacation and the landlord can show it. They will leave it nice and clean and we can go in and show it without any notices. without having to wait for 24-hour notices, because they have such a strong relationship and both of them have agreed that this will work for both. In some cases, some landlords have covered some fee or some expense for the vacation. They say, buy them a flight and they go away. And then you might say, oh, why am I spending my money? But the truth is you're winning, because selling a property that is tenanted and you're having to wait for 24 hours for the next showing, it might impact things here and there, especially if you're trying to create multiple offer situation. However, if the tenant is away, you spend $1,000, you pay for their flight to, I don't know, somewhere warm. They're away, you spend $1,000, but we take this week to market the property, get as many people through as possible. We don't have to worry about issuing notice. Anybody can go anytime, Then we show it to, let's say, 50 to 60 to 70 people in that 1 week. And then by the time the tenant comes back, the property is sold, right? So, and then also because we have 60 or 70 people who've seen it, it's much easier to create a multiple offer situation where you can get the highest possible price on your home that the market is willing to give. So those are all things to think about. And number 5, I guess, is to, while you're making those repairs, make sure that the repairs you're making are the ones that have the highest return on your investment. For example, I've seen people who will spend money where they shouldn't, there are things that will, for example, paint is a good repair to make. Like if you paint, you definitely get a high return on your investment. However, there are repairs that don't even make sense. Like, why are you wasting money doing those things? I'll give an example. Let me think of a situation where I just thought it was a total waste of money. I've seen people measure anything. So the rule of thumb is anything that can be seen. For example, if you say, oh, I'm going to change all my insulation, blah, blah, that doesn't add much value to the property, because the person would, they don't value it because they don't see it, they don't feel it, they don't see how important it is. If you have a problem like that, you probably need to get it fixed anyway. But I think a good example would be something like even changing light fixtures. I don't think you'll get the highest return from changing light fixtures as you would get if you had painted the property. That's one of them. I've seen people go and specialize and bring in unique, things, or, something very custom. Don't do anything unique, because what's unique to you is not unique to all buyers, right? So there are certain repairs that I'm just like, please don't waste your time and don't waste your money. Just save it. And if you need a list of things that you can do that will yield the highest return, painting being one of them, bathrooms are always a good place to spend your money. Sometimes the kitchen, not the full reno, because it also depends on the property, depends on the budget, depends on the comparables. So there are some things that when you do, you're just wasting money. And of course, there are things that will bring the highest return on your investment before you sell the property. So this is the end of the presentation. I know that if I were live right now, people would be asking me questions. One of the questions that has come up that I remember, there's a lot of questions that I can get through, and I think I'll try to call people to answer their questions one-on-one. We had people who submitted questions. One of the questions was, what if the tenant is not allowing showings, right? That happens. Let me just pull up a few questions because I have them. Yeah, so some of the questions are, what if the tenant does not agree to set up showings and causes trouble at the time of showings? Can I take legal action? The truth is, it's within your rights to take legal action. You can contact a paralegal, let them know that your tenant is not allowing showings, because legally they cannot not allow showings. They have to allow showings. But before I go the legal path, it depends on the relationship you have. I would probably try to go and negotiate with them and say, hey, I know that you don't want showings at 6 p.m. tonight, but what time works better? You know, is there another, like, why? I would dig deeper to find out why. They might say, oh, you know, as a family, we have dinner at 6, so we don't want anybody in the house. I'll be like, okay, that makes sense. Can we come at 5:30? Worse, like if I see that there's a problem like that, I'll try to be like, okay, fine. If that's not working, let's agree on times that work. Okay, can we agree that we're gonna allow showings from 12 p.m. to, let's say, 5:30 p.m. Monday to Friday, and we'll open it up for, let's say, all day Saturday and all day Sunday. Can we agree on that? If you don't want mornings, if you want to sleep in, if you work nights, I will accommodate your situation, but let's come up with an arrangement that works for both of us. If they agree to that, then I would not even go towards, like, you know, legal action, because I find once you start going legal, then they put up their defensive as well. So everybody, they're being defensive, you're being, you know, you're suing, like it just ends up being messy. I find that before I pursue those other avenues, I would start and trying to see if I can get a win-win. I would also see what their reason is for not allowing showing, because they know, even themselves, they know they can't just restrict showings. It's not their house. They have to, you know, they have to allow showings. So basically, I'd say start by negotiating and see how far you can go. And if it doesn't work, then it's your right to seek legal advice. Second question is, can I serve notice to end tenancy because I want to make beautification to my home, buy upgrades before selling? Okay, so this question is, can I end tenancy because I want to renovate? Honestly, for minor renovations, I don't think you can evict anyone just to do minor renovations. I think that there are situations, I think you've heard it, they say renoviction, where you can evict somebody to do renovations, but it has to be major renos, and you have to allow the tenant an option to come back if they choose to after the renovations are complete. I wouldn't do that. It's too expensive, too time consuming. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't kick somebody out just so I can renovate and then sell. I wouldn't do that. I would just do things that I can do while the tenant is there. You know, I would, goes back to like negotiating, you know, I'd like to paint the house. Is that okay with you? You know, and then we'll spend time painting. And I'll tell them, you know, I would like to sell after, that's why I'm painting. You know, like things like that. You have to negotiate and see where the sweet spot is. Yes, it's within your right to evict them to do some major renovations, but I guess it also becomes a question of like, what counts as major renovation? It has to be a condition such that it's not livable, right? Also, as I said, this is a big point. You have to remember, once you finish those renovations, you have to give them an option to come back, because that alone is not enough to evict anybody. Okay. And I would say, if you're thinking about this thing, don't do it yourself. Connect with a paralegal or lawyer who can help you. A lot of lawyers probably won't. I haven't seen a lawyer who's like solid on these issues yet. You know, a lot of lawyers, you know, they have other specialties. If you're having a problem with tenants, you should connect with a paralegal. That's the best person to go to before you get to a lawyer. Okay. So then the next question is, if a buyer assumes tenancy, then does tenancy end as per original agreement? So basically this person is asking, if there's a lease in place and the lease expires, what happens? Well, then it goes to month lease. You can't kick them out. You still have to follow the rules and regulations as outlined by the LTD, and you cannot kick them out simply because the lease is expired. Okay. How much tax do you pay when you sell rental property in Canada? Well, that's capital gain, and the best person to answer this question would be your accountant, because it also depends on a few factors, one of them being your income. So I know that 50% of your profit from, you know, so there's a few things that go into it. So I'd say like your profit after you sell the property, you pay your mortgage, you take out all the expenses. If you've done repairs over time, like all those, you take them out, whatever is left, 50% of it is taxable. But it's taxable based on your tax rate, based on your income. If you didn't make any money at all this whole year and your income is zero, then you'll be taxed at a lower tax bracket. But if you made 500,000 already, and now you have an additional 500,000 coming in from your rental property that you just sold, then your tax rate would be higher. I'd say speak to your accountant about this, because I couldn't answer that question without looking at all the other factors that the accountant would look at. Okay. So I have a lot of questions here, and I don't know if I should continue asking them and answering them like this. But if you have any question, I am noticing that might be going over the time limit that we set for this presentation. But if you have any questions, let me know. This is supposed to be like a conversation. I wish that this was live and that you were here to ask those questions, because usually when we do a presentation like this, I like to leave like 10 to 20 minutes for questions, but you're not here and you can't ask questions. But I still encourage you. This is my contact information. You have my email, you have my number. You can definitely connect with our team and we can answer some of those questions that you have. And if you have a property that you'd like to sell in this area, Kitchener-Waterloo, Guelph, and Hamilton, let me know, because I'd like to be able to help you. And when I say Kitchener-Waterloo, I include Cambridge. So I'm talking about Waterloo region, Wellington County. If you have a situation that you're dealing with, that you need advice on, please let us know and we can help you with it. Anyways, thank you for watching the presentation. Once again, I apologize for all the technical issues that we've had, and I hope to connect with you soon. Take care.